With us today is Maureen Gartner. We're so happy she's with us. Maureen is a nurse practitioner who has over 35 years of experience with neurology and neurosurgery. So yeah, she started right after kindergarten. It's cool. The past 20 years have been in movement disorders, in particular Parkinson's disease. Her passion is her care for the person with Parkinson's disease and the care partner. She was a caregiver for her mother following a stroke and understands the difficulty of responding to the challenges of caregiving. She works with her local community organization, Parkinson's Support and Wellness, to provide educational programs for the patient and the care partners. She also goes to nursing homes to educate people on Parkinson's disease. She loves to read, me too, garden, and enjoy walks with her dog. Maureen, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. So, as Kelly said, I had experience as a caregiver, which really fuels my passion for this subject. Even when I was working in neurosurgery, I had a patient come in with a caregiver, his wife, who had had a stroke, and she immediately updated me with everything about her husband. And then I stopped her and said, well, how are you doing? And she burst into tears because nobody ever asked the caregiver. So I hope that that's not the same, in these days. What I just hope to do today is to give you a little food for thought on how to take care of yourself as a caregiver. And trust me, I was not the best one at this either. But by the end of my 6 years, I did do some of what I'm going to suggest. I think it's just the most difficult thing in life is to really take care of yourself. It's so easy to take care of somebody else. So I recently came upon a quote from Rosalind Carter, which is appropriate since her husband was just put in hospice. And she said there's 4 kinds of people: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. So caregiving is really a universal issue. So what can we do? How can we cope with this new life, new journey that we're on? Well, first of all, we can plan for it, okay? So after you get a diagnosis, whether it's Parkinson's disease or anything, you want to learn as much as you can about the illness. And then you want to put your care recipient's papers in order. Make sure you have all your financial things in order. And this takes time. This doesn't happen overnight, okay? And people shy away from it because it takes energy, right? You may have to go to a lawyer. You may not have a durable healthcare power of attorney. How are you going to get all those things? So the first thing I did when I took care of my mom was I made up a folder. I have 5 siblings. I put each of their names and phone numbers in. I had a list of her medications. I had a list of her physicians and their phone numbers so that when I needed something, it was all there. I grabbed that on the way out to an appointment or to the emergency room, wherever we were going. And I had everything I needed, including a copy of her Medicare card or, whatever. So you want to plan as much as you can. Now, and also count on your friends. I have a friend whose mom has been in bed for about the last 3 months. So I call that friend every few days or text her, just checking in, anything I can do. Anything you need that I might know of since I've been through this before. And that helps you be knowledgeable about the resources in your community. There are things out there. I recently did a home visit to a patient, and the patient's wife said, the library has been the most helpful for what's around in our area. And I would never think of going to the library, but, that's where you can find resources. So you also want to give permission to yourself to either be anxious or depressed or happy or sad. There's a lot of different emotions of caregiving. Sometimes I felt like I was on a slow simmer, and then when some crisis would come up, then I burned, or I bubbled over. And then I went back to the slow simmer. So you're going to have a lot of different emotions, and don't berate yourself. These are common caregiver stress and strain. You want to find some respite, get away from the person that you have to take care of. You want to make some time for yourself and the activities that you enjoy. Again, you want to have the legal needs in place, and you might want to create a profile of your spouse's or whoever the caregiver is, their income and expenses. So you can have you can get a grip on how much money do I have? How much money do we have? What can we do with this that best meets, our needs? If a spouse or the care recipient was in some type of military service, reach out to the VA. You'd be surprised how many resources that can come from that. And many people forget about that completely. So you want to plan with safety issues. Let's not wait until dad breaks a hip to put bars in the shower. Okay, let's be a little prophylactic. If you have elderly parents, let's start putting up some bars, picking up the rugs that shouldn't, the throw rugs. You want to recognize that you need help before you're in a crisis. And that, I know that sounds difficult to do because the crises certainly happen unexpectedly, right? We never know when a fall's going to happen, or a broken hip, or we get a devastating diagnosis. But sometimes as we age, we ought to start thinking about, okay, if I'm in a wheelchair, is my bathroom accessible? Can I still wheel around the kitchen apron if I happen to be in a wheelchair? Kind of just think about obstacles that may come up that perhaps you can address before it happens. Sources of caregiver help include nursing home, home care agencies, local organizations, home health, senior services. Every city probably has an aging agency. Gosh, right now my Cincinnati agency is blanking. But typically there's some kind of care agency that you can go to for some help for resources. If there's a hospitalization, there's always a care coordinator in the hospital that will provide you with resources, or a social worker to help you kind of plan things. Council on Aging, that's what ours is called. Okay. So how do you know what agency to do? And this person that I just mentioned that talked about the library as a resource, she was amazing. She said, I've already called and I've got some people coming to interview next week. Her husband can be a little bit on the difficult side, and so she has to be really careful about what person she brings in the house. And difficult personality, not difficult with care. So you want to interview agencies. You want to be clear about what you need. If you need somebody to dispense medicine, then you have to have a nurse. A caregiver can't routinely do that. But if the caregiver can put it in the spouse's hand, then perhaps your spouse can take it, and then you don't need a nurse for that. You want to have all of the patient's personal information ready. You want to write down your questions. Take a look at the internet for references. Almost everything is rated these days on anything, from restaurants to hotels to anything. Find out if the agency has a system to send another aide if the regular one doesn't show up. That is really important. Many people, it can take a while to find the right person. And so when people don't show up and then a stranger comes in, that's very upsetting. And so you really want to find out about that. And you also want to ask, how do you make sure these people are honest? And, what if I have a complaint? How can I bring somebody in to monitor this? You want to, you are opening your home to strangers. So you want to be sure these strangers are honest and good people. So what about asking for help? Anybody think that's hard to do? But you know what? I had a big family meeting. Like I said, I have 5 siblings. Everybody got to say what their feeling was. Nobody was allowed to comment on one person or another. It wasn't an argument. Here's the facts. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I need. You might keep this in mind if you're a child taking care of a sibling, not so much a spouse taking care of a spouse. But you might want to meet with your kids if that's the situation, just so they know what's going on. Many spouses, they kind of hold off on that. They think that, my spouse is my responsibility and not the children, because the children are raising their own kids, right? But they want to be involved probably. So help them know what's going on. Think about specific things others can do to help. So lots of times people will call and say, please just tell me what I can do. And then nobody tells them what they can do. So think about specific things. Maybe it's, well, now there's grocery deliveries, but if you can't afford that, maybe it's picking up a few things at the grocery store for you, or maybe it's going to the library for you, pick up some books, or just little things. Maybe it's even, would you mind folding this basket of laundry? I'm really tired. There are small things that don't take a lot of time, but could be helpful for you if you just ask. And many people don't want to ask. And that just brings on more burden. The other thing I found very helpful was that I really worked not to make my family members feel guilty. I lived with my mother. I was the main care provider. I certainly tried to keep things together because we were a close family, and the last thing I wanted to do was break that apart. So I was very appreciative with anything they did. So how do you cope? Well, knowledge. Knowledge is power. So you want to learn as much as you can. When you know more, you can prepare better, right? If you know how to handle an off period in Parkinson's disease, then that makes it less stressful for you. You want to plan ahead. You want to plan for the worst and hope for the best. I think that's the best advice in terms of traveling with an elder or a person with Parkinson's or any other degenerative disease for that matter. It's a lot to take a wheelchair and a walker, but if you don't really plan for the worst will happen, I assure you. You want to remember to take care of yourself and know your limits. And again, ask for help and find your source of strength and rely on it, whether it's religion or exercise or medication or meditation, either one. But, especially in terms of medication, I always talk to my people with Parkinson's disease and say, you know what? We treat the depression and anxiety just as aggressively as we treat the motor symptoms, right? So as a caregiver, depression sets in, and why not take advantage and keep yourself strong? And if you need some medication for a period of time, please, there's no harm in that. There's no bias. Memorize the 4 C's of caregiving. I didn't cause it. I can't cure it. I can't control it. I can only cope with it. And remember, you didn't cause it. It did not happen because of you. Communication. I think that's the hardest because you're there 24/7. you're human, you get frustrated, and so you bite, right? Or you're sharp. My mother used to fall out of bed, and I will be dating myself, but there used to be a small store called 7-Eleven, that you could go in and get ices and, milk or something quick. So one night she had fallen out of bed, and I had a routine for getting her up, and she turned to me and she said, "Can't we just call 7-Eleven?" And I so sweetly said, "Not unless you want an icy." So of course she meant 911. And of course I wasn't going to call 911 at 2 a.m. because I could handle it. But, we all have those moments. We're going to lose our temper. We're going to be sharp. And, just be as gentle with yourself as you possibly can, because this is not easy. Okay. If you're still working, and as I was, you want to be honest with your boss about your caregiving responsibility. You want to ask and see if there's any employee assistance programs. Take advantage of flex time policies. Maybe they'll be more flexible with your work schedule. And now post-COVID, I'm sure people are working from home more. So be honest with your employer and let them know things are going on at home and you could use some extra support. So helping, how can each one of us help a care recipient? Well, when people call me and they're frustrated, I don't condemn, I don't judge, I just listen, because that's what they need. And you just have to let them get it out. If they can't get their frustration out, they're going to get an ulcer, or they're going to have a stroke, or something else is going to happen, because frustration has to come out. That's how we deal with it. So, if you're so inclined, you could volunteer to stay with the care recipient for an evening or an afternoon, or, whatever time you could afford, or you could routinely just stop by and visit for 20 minutes. You'd be surprised what a new face can do in the middle of a long week. It gets old. Sending a card or a note, saying something positive about the caregiver or encouraging. You might run errands for them when you can, or bring a dinner over. Maybe start, if people are church members, maybe there could be a food train that you could get started for this family. Little things like that make a huge difference. Be a library runner, offer to make phone calls. Sometimes that's the most horrendous thing, is trying to make a phone call. But maybe you could call some of the agencies with the list of questions that they've developed up. Share a hug. Caregivers give a lot of themselves, so they need regular hug replacements. And resources. So Council on Aging, that helpforseniors.org, that is my particular Council on Aging, but I'm sure that you all have them as well. There are pro-seniors organizations that help with legal support or advanced planning. Caregiver resources on the Parkinson's Foundation, Davis Feeney, a buddy network for people with Parkinson's. There's a lot available out there on the internet these days. And actually AARP has a ton of stuff. So you try not to feel so isolated, because the more you withdraw, the more isolated you become. And that's a problem. So I'd like to just open it up for questions or comments or anything.
Certainly encourage everyone to open up their chat and ask some questions. I have some questions, because I know as you were talking, I was just thinking to myself, you talked a lot about the planning, and I feel like, why wouldn't you want to plan? It's a great way to take some control of the situation. But I find most people don't feel like that, because to them, they're like, well, I don't want to dwell on it. I don't want to think about it. Even though I always joke, ignoring a problem does not make it go away. But well, can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because I'm sure you encounter that as well, both as a caregiver, but then also in your position where it's like people don't want to plan because nobody wants to think about the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I think, I'm 69 years old and I don't have a will. Why is that? I should have that. I don't really have a plan, and so actually we do a yearly educational forum with our 501c3. And this year it's all about planning. Who do you go to? So there are organizations out there that will help you look at senior housing, find out what you need. What are the approximate costs? What are we talking about in terms of independent living versus assisted living versus, complete care? There are elder care networks galore that will help you get your things in order, give you a will to fill in the blanks, help you with all the documents that you need in terms of durable healthcare power of attorney, POA, executor of your will, those types of things. And then there's also, I think the biggest issue is always the insurance issue. So what's Medicare? What's Medicaid? What are they going to cover? How do I look at my drugs and decide what kind of Medicare D insurance I'm going to have? There are people out there to help with this, so you don't have to navigate it alone. And I think that's the most important thing. You can't navigate this stuff alone. None of us, first of all, you get exhausted from the caregiving, and then you have no energy to do this. So you just keep putting it off. So I say find the right people to help. And if you don't know how to do that, again, I would take a look at some of your senior organizations. A lot of communities have senior centers, right? And I'm sure that there are people there that can be helpful.
We did get a question, but I don't think this is necessarily your domain. The VA advertises assistance for a caregiver for a veteran. That is actually through aid and attendance, and we will have somebody at the end, March 29th. An elder attorney will be speaking on that. I do usually joke the problem with the VA is don't they say about how a defense lawyer will only ask a question when they know the answer? And I feel like that's almost what you have to be when you call the VA. You have to know the answer so you can ask your question accordingly. And so what you do kind of want to say is not, hey, do you guys help? Because they'll be like, no, or like, this is what we do, versus, can you tell me about aid and attendance? You're not anymore. Do you have some experience?
I used to work at the VA.
And you are a good person to ask.
It's been years ago, but I think it's a hard system to work through, but I do think it has gotten better. And there's more information about the causes of Parkinson's now. If you were in Vietnam and exposed to Agent Orange, that's an acceptable diagnosis for disability, and you're eligible. There are income eligibilities. If you weren't in Vietnam, and you don't make that much money, then there's income eligibility where you can get services. So it's all about having your ducks in order. And most of the time, the first phone call will take you to an intake person that is helpful. If you get the runaround, then I would say if the VA hospital is close by, just go with the intention of spending a few hours, because it is never quick. Trust me. But I do think that they mean to help and do well.
And then we got a couple of requests. If you can share your screen again real quick, the 4 C's of caregiving. Okay. I didn't cause it. I cannot control it. I cannot cure it. And I can only cope with it.
Yeah, let me get back to my presentation. I didn't cause it. I can't cure it. I can't control it. I can only cope with it. When I dealt with my mom's stroke, I would get angry and I would think, I'm really not angry at her. I'm angry at the stroke. I'm angry at what the stroke did to her. So don't take it out on her, you know? And with Parkinson's, and as we age, you know, we lose a little bit every year. Our brain cells keep dying. And so we just have to keep coping. We have to find new ways to cope with what we can't do as well anymore. Okay, so especially people with Parkinson's disease, you know, they can't do early morning appointments. It takes them forever to get dressed. So don't plan for a morning appointment, you know, don't try to rush them, you know, allow enough time that they can get up and get moving on their own timetable so that it's not stressful to you. You have to learn to have realistic expectations. Sometimes you can't tell them what's on the agenda because they'll bug you all day about it, right? Especially if they have some compulsive tendencies, which can happen with levodopa. So I made a pact with my siblings that they were never to tell my mother the day before about some activity, never, because all she did was want to get dressed for it. Let's go do it. So you have to learn to manage around some of the deficits and learn new ways to do things.
Doreen had said that she works as a family caregiver advocate with the Area Agency on Aging in South Carolina, and caregivers call us for respite, but when they're desperate. And so, yeah, if you could plan ahead, because it's like, you don't want to get to that point where you're just like, I'm gonna, you know, scream.
Right.
Someone
And
asked
when you think you need respite care, first of all, absolutely, you have to plan ahead and you have to interview. You have to go look at these places that are offering respite care and then try a night or 2 days to see how it goes. You can't just deposit somebody in an unfamiliar environment without planning. So it's you have to plan for respite care. It does not just happen. Sometimes if hospice is involved, they provide inpatient respite care. And that seems to be a little bit better, but I warn you, you have to be cautious about sedating drugs if they're in hospice, because that may not be your plan.
Someone asked, can you speak to the impact of caregiving on mental, emotional, and physical health?
Okay, I gained 50 pounds taking care of my mother. I sought counseling. I tried a support group, but I knew too much and I was running it, so I didn't want to do that. It affects every part of your health. You know, that's why I think it's so hard to keep yourself healthy. So you have to stay up to snuff with your own medical care, right? You have to keep going to the doctor. You have to go to the dentist. You have to get your eyes checked. If you let yourself go and something happens to you and you don't have a plan, then, you know, your loved one is going to be in deep underground, right? So, you know, mental stress is real. Mental stress is real. And that's why I mentioned before, if you're struggling and you need some help with a medication, antidepressants just readjust neurotransmitters in your brain. They don't make you addicted to them. You know, there is no, what do I want to say? My word finding's terrible. There's no aura, oh, you take an antidepressant. You know, we need them. We need them. Our brains get depleted in certain neurotransmitters. And so antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs can really help balance that out to maintain your mental health. You want to watch your alcohol intake. You don't want to be coping with alcohol. Talk to people, find a counselor. If your best friend doesn't want to listen to you anymore, find a counselor, ask your doctor, because your doctor can be helpful with this. Physical health, get outside and at least walk around the block a couple times a day. If you can let your care recipient alone, or take advantage of when people drop by, ask them, can you just sit here for 15 minutes so I can just get outside and take some deep breaths and de-stress? Again, you have to ask for help. I can't stress it enough. People are not that in tune to your needs unless they've been through it themselves. So physical, emotional, spiritual, I hope that you have a spiritual relationship with some outer force. I'm Catholic. Church was very important to me. A lot of counseling came through Christian counselors because that's where my faith is. And I always maintained if I didn't have faith through that experience, I would have never made it, because my God just helped me through every moment. I was convinced of that. So you have to maintain your spiritual health. You have to maintain your mental health, your physical health. You have to take care of yourself.
More of a remark that planning ahead can be difficult because there's so many different possible trajectories, ranging from keeping them at home to nursing home or memory care. And so while I understand that, I do feel like you were saying, you can't just put somebody someplace tomorrow. So you do sort of want to start doing your homework early. What is a good place around here? Because sometimes, even if it's not a nursing home, even if it's just a rehab center, a lot of people will say, well, the hospital social worker is supposed to find a place for my loved one, my dad, my husband, my mom, my sister. And yes, but at the same time, when they have 50 people that they have to place somewhere, they're going to go with who they know is going to have an open bed. And that might not be the best place. Whereas if you can say, hey, I've gone here and we really liked them. Can we check and see if there's an open bed there? And maybe you do the homework. You're going to have a better shot at getting your loved one in where you want them versus just kind of making that quick deposit somewhere, because chances are if there's a bed open, either you just got really lucky and should probably buy a lottery ticket that day, or it's not the best facility.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really hard. That's why I'm looking forward to this senior housing presentation that we're having. Again, there's people out there that will help you. There are. And I guess I would just say, try the internet search. If you don't come up with that, try your senior group, your local senior community group. There are people out there that will walk you through it, and they don't cost either. They don't charge.
And then I like this. Corey said about her mother, who has since passed, that she used to say adjust or bust. And that was her way of coping. And I'm like, those are words to live by.
Yes, absolutely.
Sheila said that she too gained 50 pounds. It was hard to find time to exercise, plan, buy, cook, and clean for 2 different meals, etc. And then
the other thing I think is helpful is to focus on what you're able to do, and focus on your care recipient, focus on what they're able to do. Don't take everything away from them. Don't dress them because it's faster. Let them plod along. It's not going to hurt them, and it certainly helps them. As they keep losing functioning, the brain doesn't always go as quickly as the body in Parkinson's, right? So especially for men, I think it's very difficult that they can't pull up their own pants. They don't want to wear a diaper, first of all, and certainly they can't get it on by themselves. So try to preserve their abilities to do what they can for as long as you can.
And then Janet explained, in our area, respite care is available for a minimum of 10 days, and she would only want like a long weekend. So she's kind of running into a hard situation because a caretaker from an agency would be $30 an hour. And if her husband were to fall, they would probably call 911 rather than try to get him up. And she says he falls often, so they don't really want to always, have this situation where the, 7-Eleven is just called a lot.
Yeah, that's a shame. I wouldn't think respite care should have a minimum, plus the cost of it,
Mm.
One Easter week, I was always in a choir. And so the week before Easter, Palm Sunday week, I had a lot of responsibilities to sing, and I got this advertisement in the mail for $50 a night at this nursing home for respite care. I'm like, Mom, you're in it. Taking you on Wednesday, pick you up on Sunday. Sorry. But it was good. We went to visit her, so it wasn't like she was alone for 4 days, but it was helpful. But I would think there would be other respite care available for a less than 10-day stay. That seems like a long time. Plus the cost of it. I don't even know what respite care is, what the cost is per night. I would expect between 150 and 200 probably.
How did you take time for yourself as the caregiver?
So I said I was one of 6. So after we had this meeting, I asked them all to take an evening where they would pick my mom up at 4 and then maybe bring her back at 7. So at least that gave me a breather. I'm a nurse. I was a nurse 24/7. So gave me a breather from the time I was home until she came in at 7. Some of my sisters would then do her shower for her, some of them not. It varied. But that was one main way that I did it. And I asked them to help on the weekends, but that was challenging at best. And again, they were raising their kids. So it was just a tough time. I got to admit, it was very difficult, but we made it. And I'll tell you, it changed my life, and it brought me to this passion for caregivers. So I always say I would have never understood what a partner goes through or what it means to be a caregiver unless I was one. And I was. So it took me a few years to process all this, and took me a year to lose the weight, but I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I had the experience. I think spouses, it's different than children parent. You expected to live with your spouse and be happy, and not a fantasy land, but you expected to struggle, but you were committed to each other. I don't think you fully are prepared when that crisis happens. And then maybe you're younger, maybe you're older, but what the future looks like without your other half, that's a hard thing to adjust to.
How did you deal with, when you talked about it, resentment? Because I have to assume there must have been a little bit of resentment when it was sort of like, why is this all on me when I am one of 6 and I'm taking the weekends and my time is important as well? And I could see how that would be very frustrating.
I dealt with it in prayer. I wrote a lot. I journaled a lot, because again, if you can get that negativity out into words, you can look at it and say, oh, that really sounds awful. It's really not that bad, is it? Or yes, it really is that bad. And this is a reminder, I need to do something about it. My sibs would go on week-long vacations, and do you think they got a sub for the day they were supposed to take mom? Of course not. Of course not. So yeah, that resentment can build up. But I have to also say, my mom was just the most caring woman and held our family together. And so it's not that I owed it to her, but I never wanted to destroy the closeness that we had. So yeah, I had to swallow it a lot. Yes, I drank a lot then. I'm just being perfectly honest, because this is just, again, it's not easy. But I was in counseling. I saw a counselor. So I did the things I could to keep myself healthy. Was I perfect? Absolutely not.
But who is?
Right, right. But you know, I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I thought I should be. But I let go of that pretty easily, though. Anybody want to bring dinner? You're on.
I'm appreciating the candor, though, that you're like, yeah, this happened, and you know, yeah, I put on 50 pounds, or yeah, I probably maybe had more to drink than I would normally, and I just think it's so wonderful that you're just being so open about it.
You have to accept help. You know, you have to find a way to get help, and you have to accept it, and you have to lower your expectations, because the help is not going to do it like you do it. Okay, so don't expect that. Oh my, this brings back a lot of memories, folks. But I love my 7-Eleven story.
Tell me a little bit about asking, though, for the help. Not because I assume it wasn't just your siblings. I assume you did occasionally reach out, like you said, like, hey, yes, please bring me dinner. We had maybe 2 doctor's appointments today, and the last thing I want to do is start cooking. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so again, you have to be realistic. What's going to help you the most? Okay. And that's where the planning comes in. Is it going to be that, yeah, you have 3 doctor's appointments that day, and she's going to be too tired, so you really can't go out to dinner? And do you really want to go do a drive-through? Because I'm not a fast food person, and I'm already eating and drinking too much, you know? So you have to look at the week ahead and say, what do I need here? Can I count on, could I ask somebody else to take them to a doctor's appointment if it's not an important appointment? You know, maybe it's just I don't know, dermatology exam. I can't really think what wouldn't be important, but certainly maybe a relative or a friend would do that. Sometimes I would ask one of her friends to take her out to lunch. You know, she was mobile. She could get in and out of the car. And occasionally I would ask that just so she could get out with somebody else. I counted on people that I could take her to their homes, again, her friends or cousins, and we would play cards. She wasn't as good as she was, but again, it was a chance to get her out and socialize among other people. So you have to figure out what your need is.
Did you feel, because I mean, I too raised my hand. I don't like to ask for help either. But was that kind of hard, or you recognized it as sort of like, I need this. This is a necessary evil, if you will.
Yeah, I think I adjusted the first 6 months. You know, I learned what she couldn't do. I learned how to adjust to that, because sometimes she would get up during the night and put something on the stove. So I learned to keep a more wakeful ear, which is the cause of my current insomnia, I think. You know, she would, if she watched, I used to get Disney movies because I thought that would be the least intrusive, but no, she would dream about whoever the villain was in the Disney movie. And then she would turn the light on at 2 a.m. and say, Maureen, there's a bear in the basement, or, you know, whatever. So you learn to curtail some things. You learn what you can and can't manage. And again, you have to keep making adjustments. I can't cure it. I can't control it. I can only cope with it.
How many times did you repeat that to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Like a mantra.
Yeah. And if you Google caregiver, there's a caregiver Bill of Rights out there. For some reason, I couldn't ever cut and paste it on a slide today. It just wouldn't let me. So Google Caregiver Bill of Rights and take a look at that, because it gives you permission to feel all these feelings. You know, we're just not perfect, and you're going to be tired. You got to have sleep. You know, you have to have enough sleep. So if the care recipient is up all night, you're not going to do well. So then you have to talk to the doctor about that. If that's not working, then maybe you have to get a caregiver in for the nights instead of the days so that you can get sleep. You know, you really have to figure out what your needs are. And I don't mean to be, I hope you don't take this as being so negative. Because I was glad for the experience. I really was. It taught me so much. And it taught me self-care too. I wasn't the best at self-care. I don't think any of us are really. So we had lots of funny moments and we had lots of good times, but it was all in the context of a different mom than I had known before.
I don't see it as negative. I see it as being truthful. No one likes toxic positivity, that it's like, you will be happy, you will feel good. Nobody wants that. And, you know, I often say in a support group, it's nice to know someone else is going through this, because even though we all want to be special and unique, sometimes it's just nice to know that it's like, you were there, you snapped too, you know, you then had regret and guilt because you didn't really mean to be snappy, but it's 2 a.m. and there's a reason sleep deprivation is a form of torture. And you're a little short, and, you know, but then you also forgive yourself. But one other thing you did talk about is you mentioned, you know, like checking in on friends. And I do feel like that can be very difficult because, you know, when someone dies, we know what we're supposed to do. I mean, we have kind of unwritten rules, but we understand, like, you call, you send a card, you bring food. But when somebody is ill, people don't often know what to do. And it's like, well, if I call, am I bothering you? If I, you know, were people checking in on you, or did you feel like I had to make a lot of the overtures because otherwise, it just wasn't, I would then almost be isolated?
I'm not sure people checked in on me as much as I just kept reaching out. Mm-hmm. So I had friends in other, you know, cities, and I would call, or my mom's sister, my aunt was a big sense of a huge support during that time. I think as a person now who's checking in on a friend, you know, would you like me to stop by? Do you want to have a drink together? Do you want to go out for a quick bite if your husband's home and can, you know, keep an eye on your mom? She's a great cook, so I would never offer to cook her with her. But that's where communication's so important. And we have to learn to ask, what can we do? Please don't say nothing. You know, when you ask, what can you do? And they say nothing. No, I don't want to hear nothing. You know, please tell me, what can I do? What would be helpful? Would it be helpful if I went to the grocery store for you? You know, would it be helpful if I just stopped in for a half hour once a week? What would be helpful? And that then gives them permission maybe to ask for something specific. I remember one time some cousins were in from out of town and they said, well, we'd like to take you and your mom out for dinner. And I said, I'd really like it if you took my mom out for dinner and left me home. And they did. And she survived. So again, it depends on the level of care. How much help does the care recipient need? She was fairly independent and going to the bathroom, so I felt like she could go out without me. But that's how I think we have to handle things. You have to be able to communicate.
We're getting a lot of good information. I always encourage everybody, because we have a lot of stuff in the chat that we've put in there. Some people have put some good websites. Kelly put in the Caregiver Bill of Rights that Maureen had talked about. If you go down to the bottom and you click on the 3 buttons, you can save your chat. And so you always just want to make sure you do that. So this way you'll always have those references to go back to. Because while this will be available, the chat won't be. So somebody had said that thank you so much. They look forward to sharing it with care partners at their support group when they do the breakout sessions and everything. So this was excellent today.
Great. I'm so glad it was helpful.
Yeah, definitely have anything, because otherwise I'm going to ask questions. Does anybody have any other questions they'd like me to address? Because otherwise I can always ask questions. Caregiving, care partnering, that's a big deal. I just, it's not recognized, but talk to me a little bit about, you said it, the mom you took care of was not necessarily the mom you knew. Can you talk to me a little bit? It's an ambiguous loss because she's here, but at the same time, she's not really the same mom. Can you tell me a little bit?
Yeah, that was the worst part. So I don't know how many of you have experiences with stroke, but if a person is right-handed and their left brain is where the stroke is, that's where their speech center is. And so typically speech is the predominant problem. If a person is right-handed, but they have their stroke in the right side of their brain, so that is not the speech center, there is a lot more cognitive difficulty. Okay. So they can confabulate. They make up stories. Okay. Those are great. Those are always great. They can't plan. They can't follow through on things. Much of which is frontal executive function in Parkinson's as well. Memory doesn't seem to be too impaired, but they're more impulsive in things. So like getting up at 2 a.m. and putting something on the stove. She was a great cook, you know, but she couldn't cook anymore. She wasn't able to. Those were the frustrating things because that was not my mother. And that's when I learned really to journal a lot and to really get out and breathe, walk and breathe, because that helps calm you down. You know, it just helps you feel better. You get more oxygen in your lungs, you know, you can cope. But when you start to lose the person that you knew and loved, you know, that's a living death. And that's way different. You know, sometimes I had almost wished that she had cancer, because at least cancer has an end date. All right. If it's a bad cancer and you get 6 months to live, you get 6 months to live and you're done. You can cope with that caregiving for 6 months. But when you have a chronic disease and you don't know how long this caregiving is going to go on, oh my goodness, that's when it's like, you know, you have to take a deep breath and say, am I committed to this? Am I going to keep doing it? And if so, how? So you lose that bit of your loved one, but hopefully you don't forget that it's still her or that him or them or whoever. And you look for flickers of the person that you miss. You really do. And those were always the good times when you saw her eyes get bright and laugh heartily, you know, instead of the stroke face. But yeah, I think as I am a care provider for my patients, I think about that a lot with the couples, because that's what you're going through. You're losing that person that you knew and loved, and it's really hard, for better, for worse, for sickness and in health. So that's emotional drain.
Penelope actually wrote, "My journal is labeled. Let me grieve
I
you
can't hear
before
you.
Penelope wrote, "My journal is labeled. Let me grieve you before you go," listing all the things we can no longer have or can do together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Um, someone
Yeah,
wrote,
I
"A
have to
living."
say, when my mom died, I didn't grieve very long. I had grieved the 6 years I took care of her. So it was a relief, and I could truly celebrate that she was in heaven and we were done with this. And I got to move on with my life. I think it's just harder to face the facts of what you've lost when you have a shell in front of you.
Actually a good idea. Janet wrote, "When my mother-in-law was staying with us after a stroke, we threw the breaker for the stove when we went to bed."
That is a good idea.
That's a good idea.
I have a gas stove though, so I couldn't do that. But that is a good idea. Yeah. My mom she never wandered outside, but she would open the door at 2 a.m. and say somebody was there, or, she had these vivid dreams, and then she woke up and thought it was real.
Someone really likes what you said about a living death, that seemed very appropriate. It was very perfectly said and very true, that it was sad but true.
Mhm. Yeah, that's where my counseling really helped. When you can start to name the things again, it helps you look at it and say, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. Now I can move on because I know this is what I'm dealing with. Or I can explore, whatever I need to explore to help me cope with it. But naming things is very important for me.
I like to understand sometimes why I'm feeling like, sometimes I feel like my feelings might be disproportionate for a situation. So I really want to go back and examine, like, why is this so triggering or such a
Right.
big deal for me? What's underlying, what's happening? And then I feel better once I can kind of understand it.
Right. And there usually is some underlying thing, right? Either something from our childhood or something that I don't know, some bad experience at work or something, and it just triggers. It puts you back there, and you got to say, nope, that's not where I am. This is where I am, and let's move forward. Don't need to rely on negative experiences.
Yes, name it to claim it. I like that, David.
Mhm.
So we are out of time. I do want, again, we had some really great stuff in the chat, so I really do hope you save your chat. Those 3 little buttons, those 3 little dots, please save your chat. There was a lot of stuff. Maureen, thank you so much for your time, your candor, your caring, your experiences, for sharing with us today. As always, at PMD Alliance, we have a tradition, our wave of gratitude, and we are very grateful. You talked about expressing the gratitude and saying thank you. We are very grateful for what your program today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Take care.
Bye.